Welcome to the Biblical Leadership at Work podcast. I am your host, Jason Woodard. Today, we will meet Jim Merkle, who has spent many years leading large teams in retail operations. Jim is also a veteran Marine, a husband of nearly 30 years, and a father to 3 sons. On this month's podcast, we will cover several interesting and important leadership topics. For example, Jim and I speak about treating team members with love and respect, even when difficult performance discussions and decisions must be made.
It just works. People get behind you. They want to work for a leader that loves on them and talks to them and knows about their kids. And I've never been afraid to say, I'm going to pray for you. You know, people are struggling with stuff. And then I've had people come to me and say, Jim, will you pray for me? And of course, so that's when I know that they know that I care about them. You know, sometimes there's tough decisions to be made, but I don't ever feel that anybody that works for me is surprised if they have to be disciplined. You know, it's like, it's the last thing I want to do. So when it does have to happen, they kind of feel bad, like they've let me down.
We also discuss the importance of allowing people to have enough freedom to make decisions and to make mistakes that they can learn and grow from.
I'm there to work alongside them. I want them to make decisions, but make smart decisions. Because I think when people make mistakes, that's when the good stuff happens.
Jim will also share some excellent guidance for both new and seasoned leaders regarding focus.
You can't control macroeconomics and you can't control what's going on with things like that. They can control the cleanliness of their building. They can control the customer service in their building. They can control close rates on estimates. There's so much stuff that they can control simply by following up and holding people accountable in the right way. But you can control that kind of stuff, and that's what's going to set you apart.
So now let's meet Jim Merkle. All right, Jim Merkle, really glad to have you on today. Appreciate you taking the time to join the podcast, brother.
Good evening. Thanks for having me, Jason. Been looking forward to it.
So let's go ahead and get started. Talk to the audience about your career background, educational background. I know it's a pretty interesting one, so I want you to share that with everybody.
So I grew up around here in the southern Michigan area. Moved around a lot as a kid. The last count I had, I think, what's the best one? I think my parents were kind of like gypsies, I guess the best way to put it, but moved around all over a lot of southern states. And I think it was about 17 schools I attended. Kind of landed a little bit, slowed down a little bit when I got in high school. Graduated from Battle Creek Central. I was kind of on my own that last part of high school, so I was looking for a way to be more stable, and I knew I had to become an adult fast. So I joined the Marine Corps. And so 7 days after high school, I was standing on 2 yellow feet on a tarmac in San Diego. So did that, grew up a little bit. When I got back to the Battle Creek area, I'd met my now wife just before I went into the Marine Corps. And when I got home, we kind of connected some more. And we've been married. May 22nd will be 30 years. So we've been together longer than that. But
yeah.
We have 3 boys. Colton, who is our youngest, he was our blessing 11 years ago. And he keeps us young. And he keeps us very active. And then we have our middle son, Landon, who we actually adopted from a family member when he was 3 days old. So he's 24. And then our oldest son is 28, and he's married to a girl named Chloe. They both live down in Indiana, pretty much on the Kentucky border of Louisville. She's a teacher, and he's finishing his master's degree for being a teacher. So they're both teaching down there. No grandkids yet. I don't know when that's going to happen. So I've done Kellogg Community College, was part of the machine tool program there at the regional center. I did that, was working to be a machinist. Worked at Eaton's for about 10 years after that in Marshall, Eaton Corporation. It was part of the torque control. We made rear end differentials and things like that.
Yeah. I know quite a few guys that used to work at that plant in Marshall, actually. Yeah, it was a big plant.
Yeah, it's gone now. It's a shame.
Yeah.
It's kind of sad when you drive by there. It's just an empty field. So I left before the plant closed. Worked a lot with the union there. It was kind of like my first leadership position. So I kind of learned a lot from the guys and gals that were older than me and more tenure in the union, and they took me under their wing. And also learned a lot from the plant management side too, just as far as negotiating and sometimes level heads persevere better. So I learned a lot from that too. And I attended the Michigan State School of Labor Relations and Human Resources. When we heard that the plant was closing, we had decided that we were going to move to Kentucky. So just on a whim, we started searching, and we bought a piece of land, almost 30 acres. And my wife's a nurse. She graduated about 25 years ago from nursing school. And so she's been a nurse for a quarter of a century, a long, long time. So she did that while I built us a house down there. When the house was done, I took a job working for a small flooring company and did that for about a year and a half. Contemplated opening up my own flooring store because there's another job I mixed in there too for Carpetland USA I didn't mention. But so that was before Eaton and all that, after the Marines. So I've done a lot of things like that. And so I was contemplating opening my own flooring facility, and there was this gentleman coming in. I ended up loving him like an uncle. He was rough around the edges, and he ended up hiring me. And I was like, no way I'm going to come work for you. I'm not going to do that. I had a big title at the other company, so I'm not going to go work in one of your departments. I guess I was still not mature enough to see the forest for the trees. And anyway, so he sat me down, and me and a couple people that worked for me ended up working for him. And he said, work for me 3 years and I'll make you a store manager. And it was about 3.5 years into it. He held true to his word, and then he retired about 9 months later. I was a store manager under him for about 9 months. And I think I laugh now, but man, he was the old school, tell you like it is, nothing's sugar coated. Yeah. And like my first year as a store manager, I thought I got fired about 10 different times. But that was just his way of toughening me up. So, we moved around several times, and then we've moved to Michigan and back to Kentucky and back to Michigan again. And, I've worked in 8 different stores as a store manager, done a lot of different things. I've been offered different leadership positions, and timing's one thing, but then what's right for your family is another thing. You also got to balance, do I want to go be a regional person or a corporate person or a district person and all that, and move my family halfway across the country when I've already got them 5-6 hours away from home. So I've contemplated and I've thought about some of them spots. I've just never took them, because one of the things I learned through all of it is, family's still the number one thing. Unfortunately for me, Wendy, being a nurse, through all the moves I've done, she's always been able to move around and get another job like instantly.
I have a few questions through that. So when you decided to join the Marines, you were right out of high school. Was that impromptu, or had you thought about doing that? Were you being recruited kind of through your senior year?
I was recruited in my senior year. Like I said, without going a lot into it, I was taking care of myself. Parents had got a divorce, and I was a senior, and I wasn't going halfway across the country with one or the other. So it was kind of tough. They didn't know what they were doing. And to me, it looked like a way for me to be able to be out on my own. So my recruiter was a really good guy, and God love him. I can't remember his name now. I remember his face, and him and his wife, they had many conversations with me personally. I actually painted his car for him. I went to the Voed Center for body work, and he had a Camaro. I kept it for like a month at the body shop, painted it for him my senior year. But I remember when he dropped me off at MEPS, he handed me my Marine Corps ring. I got it from him before anybody else.
Wow.
There's just been a lot of people along my path that have helped guide me in the path. Because I was, I hear stories about young people did dumb stuff and got in trouble for it. I did dumb stuff too. I just never got in trouble for it. So I don't judge people for that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
It took a long path for me to even become a Christian. And we can talk about that later too. But there was a lot of people that helped me along that path too.
Yeah. I have a similar story when I was young did a lot of really dumb stuff that could have easily ended up dead or in jail. And when I come across people that did end up in jail or, things like that, it's very difficult for me to judge them for that, because only by the grace of God did I not go that way. When you were in the Marines, what did you do? What did you train for? What was your occupation there?
So my MOS was mechanical option, which nowadays is like that. I guess I don't know for sure. I know based on my son being in the Navy, my oldest son, that it's different. But then it was like really broad in MOS. So it's now basically the way I understand it is if you say I want to be, I don't know, say you want to be an MP or whatever it is. And when you go to MEPS, if that job isn't up, then you just don't sign up for it and you come back the next month or whatever, something similar to that. Well, back then it wasn't like that, so I thought I was going to be, so even though it was mechanical option, I thought I was going to be training to work with firearms but I wasn't. It ended up being more like a mechanical training and, for working on equipment and things like that. Yep. Now some people did, but it was really broad. And really understand the scope of it. I was a kid and maybe I just signed the wrong thing and
Yeah.
was not told enough information, so.
Yep. How long did you serve in the Marine Corps?
So when I got in, I technically, if you count the inactive, I was inactive reserves till 96, I believe. So about 4-ish years, but most of it was inactive reserve. Yeah.
So then you started working in businesses that were home improvement type businesses. So what drove you into that line of work to do flooring and things like that?
Well, it's funny, it's like getting married young and having kids young, at least for me back then, wanting to do better. The sales side of it and interacting was, the biggest thing is I knew I could make money off a commission, and I knew I could make money just by being a good person and, showing some initiative and talking to people and helping them through their projects. And I just kind of took to it like a duck to water. And then when I was doing manufacturing, it was tough. I learned a lot. And again, it was another part of my life where people helped me grow and kind of get me going in the path they wanted to go. So there come a path after that 10 years or so. I was like, okay, do you stay in manufacturing and continue down a machinist role, or do you do something else, or do you fall back on, your first career you were doing? And doors just kind of opened up. And I think I'm where God's wanted me to be. In career I'm in now, I've been able to minister and worship to hundreds and hundreds of people that have worked for me. Literally thousands of people have worked for me over the years. There's like the awful 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. phone call you get from somebody, and they've got the most tragic thing going on in their life, and you're the person that they call first, and you're the one trying to come up with the right words, hoping God will give you the right words to give to them. I just feel God's put me on the path.
Yeah.
I think everywhere I've been, I think I'm where God's wanting me to be,
Yeah, I understand that. I really appreciate what you said earlier too about roles, regional roles, higher level roles, and those just not going after those. And I think back on my career, there was a period of time when I was very career ambitious and incrementally got promoted. And then more recently, it's for me became clear on what my fit is, like what I love to do. And it's not a nonstop career trajectory up. I've figured out where I want to be. And I was even talking to a former colleague today on the phone, and she's younger than I am, but old enough to have, I guess, had that same experience of, I kind of know what I want to do, where I want to say plateau, because we should always continue to learn and grow, but not so much seeking that next promotion. It's like, this is what I'm good at. This is my area. And, what God's designed me and made me to do and be really good at it. So I have a lot of respect for people that have figured that out. And it seems like you've been able to do that. So talk a little bit about your faith background, and when did you come to know the Lord? How did that happen? I'm sure that's an interesting story with your background in high school. Sounds like you weren't brought up in a Christian home. So share with us how you came to know Christ.
So there's little touch points throughout life that you think back. Like I remember one time, I don't remember the specifics. I was a little kid, but I remember enough that it's there. I remember the church. There was this little church when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, and we were in Texas, in this little town in Texas. They would pick me up on the bus every Sunday, and I looked forward to it. It was called Gum Grove Baptist Church. I'll never forget the name. Don't really remember where it was at. I know at the time we lived in a little town called Dayton, Texas. So I couldn't tell you if the church is still there or how far away from it was, but it was the highlight of like my 3rd and 4th grade. We were real poor. They worked on a farm, and but for the summer they would pick us up. It seems like when I was a little kid, looking back, it seems like I was there all the time. It seems like the church bus picked us up all the time, and when I wasn't in school and school was out. So people like that pour into you, and you may not know it when you're doing stuff like that as a volunteer or you're working at the churches. Stuff like that, has an effect. So no, I wasn't a church home. And then I don't know if I was just the secular side of it. I remember when I was in the Marine Corps, didn't really know what Protestant meant or Catholic. And they come around and said, do you want to go to Protestant service or Catholic service? And I'm thinking to myself, I don't know what either one of those are. I don't want to do either. So I didn't. Well, what I found out is when you don't go to those services, you spend about 3 hours doing PT and work. So you can bet the next time around, I just picked one. I said, Protestant, which I still didn't know what it was.
You found religion.
So again, stuff like that. The chaplain and the stuff like that. That was kind of really like my first introduction as an adult, believe it or not.
Yeah.
So then as I'm working, so a friend of mine, and I'll say his name because I love him to death. His name's Mike Copenhagen, but we worked at Eaton together. We were buddies. We kind of went to work at Eaton together too. It was funny, but we would spend breaks and lunches, and he was super smart with the Bible and grew up in a very Christian home, and his parents were just awesome. I envious of them, but he would I'd be like, Mike, I don't believe that there's dinosaurs. The Bible doesn't say nothing about dinosaurs. And he would spend the next half hour showing me how the Bible did talk about dinosaurs. And then, in my head, so the next day I'd be like, all right, I'm going to fire something at him this time. And he'd spend the next half hour. And so there come a point, we start going to church. We went to his church a little bit, but we start going to First West, me and my wife. She can read something and memorize it. It's crazy. Wendy is like, she reads something once and she understands it inside and out. Me, I read it and I understand it, but it kind of drifts along. It takes a long time for stuff to sink in. So she was eager, like just eating up every book she could read about religion, and she was just into it. And so I slowly started coming along. We start going to some Bible studies. And then, again, I was the guy that was sitting there with secular views. And it was like I was always trying to find some reason to stump everybody, and I could never be stumped. And there just come a point. Rob Nichols was the pastor at First West at the time. This was about early 1999 when I finally got saved. I think in December of 99, we both got baptized, me and Wendy did. And we've went to a lot of different churches over the years because we moved around so much. We've been non-denominational, we've been Baptist, and went to Wesleyan, and we've went to Vineyard, and we've went to Southern Baptist. And so over the last 23 years, we've really got a good immersion.
Yeah.
Where I would say we're very non-denominational.
My wife and I were both baptized together as adults. And I think that we all, want for our children to be baptized young, to stay in the faith. That's the ideal. But I will say that it is a joy as an adult when you come to faith to do that with your spouse and be able to have that memory of being baptized with them. So I think that's pretty special. It's a pretty memorable event for sure.
And I have gotten to baptize every one of them. My boys over the years, all around the same age, probably around 11. Like Colton just got baptized, my youngest, a couple months ago. So that was awesome. He got baptized right in the church parking lot at Friends, and I got to baptize him there. The water was super cold. It was in a swimming pool, a little portable swimming pool. So right about 11-ish, I've got to baptize all the boys throughout the year. So that's been awesome.
That is. So changing subjects a little bit, Jim, when you think about your leadership style, and you've been leading people for quite a long time, what's your key motto, your principle, your leadership principle that you always go back to and help to teach others as well?
I think being a person of my word is the number one thing I always go back to. And the same thing I expect of my managers. The second thing is being a servant leader. And I know that's a word anymore that's just gotten to me like maybe watered down, or it's just like everybody says it to say it, but I'm not like that. I mean, in the last 20 years, I'll clean the bathrooms, I'll scrub the floor, I'll load a pallet of mulch outside. And it's not to show off. It's not to do that at all. There's a lot of moving parts in a building. And so, I run the buildings and I help out with the district staff. It seems like I'm always a captain of something, and I'll be the sister store for somebody. And my own people, I try to be real humble to them, and I try to be a person of my word. So whatever the topic is, if I say it's going to happen, I do everything in my power to make it happen. And the same thing with my leaders. I expect the same thing out of them. That
is a very, very important principle, is following through on your word. I have seen in multiple occasions when simply just a lack of follow through, it just erodes credibility. I mean, we've talked about this, I think maybe in the last podcast, but it's so, I don't know if I would say it's so common, but it's a powerful device for engagement on a team, because they just lose trust and they don't have any faith in their leadership. So even on the small stuff, right? That was one of the first things that I had somebody teach me as a young supervisor was, if you tell somebody you're going to do something, like, you have to do it. Write it down. Don't forget it. There's no excuse. That's one thing you cannot do, is not follow through on something. Doesn't mean you're going to make something happen that person wanted, but you're at least going to follow through, follow up, and circle back to them and let them know what the status is. I mean, that's huge.
It's a huge, like, you said, it's a huge part of employee engagement. There's a lot of questions on employee engagement surveys. I mean, we've all took them many, many times over the years. And a lot of the questions, you're like, I see an employee engagement survey, the bottom line is, what do they think of their overall leader? They're going to answer the questions one way or the other based on how they feel about their leader, even though the questions try to stumble them and try to get them to think different things. But if you treat everybody as, again, I'm going to say servant leader, but that's, I don't think it's necessarily the word is servant leader. I know the Bible talks about servant leadership too, but it's more about, I think Jesus says something along the lines, he's telling the disciples not to exercise authority over people.
Yeah.
You can still be a boss without doing that. And it's a thin line you walk, but it's about bringing people alongside you up the hill with you. And, if you look back and there's nobody behind you, then that's the problem. Fortunately, the stores I've always been at, we've always scored really, really high in like the top 10% of the company. And it seems like every year somebody from corporate will want to know why. And I don't really have an answer for them, except I treat people like they're family. I don't, sometimes there's tough decisions to be made, but I don't ever feel that anybody that works for me is surprised if they have to be disciplined in any kind of way. Or, that's like, it's the last thing I want to do. So when it does have to happen, they kind of feel bad, like they've let me down. There's been times when I've been walking around at a city fair or something, and Wendy's like, "Who's that?" And I'll be like, "Oh, they worked for me like a year ago. I had to let them go for this, or I had to let them go for that." And she's like, "What?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Well, they act like they're your best friend." I'm like, "Well, I wasn't mean about it. I didn't want to do it." They kind of backed themselves in their own corner. I try to do that no matter what. So when I'm talking servant leadership, that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Is I'm not cleaning the bathroom to show off or to make everybody. I'm cleaning the bathroom because the bathroom needs cleaning.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to go tell Sally to clean the bathroom when I'm not doing anything either. And I can go clean the bathroom myself. So,
Jim, I think that your example of, walking through a termination process with somebody, but doing it in a loving way. And I know that sounds to some people counterintuitive, but if you truly have, love for people, you're going to have to, sometimes those difficult things happen, just like with our children, right? You're going to discipline your children. Just like God says that he disciplines those he loves, and he allows us to go through conviction and suffering and for our own good and sanctification. So I really appreciate you bringing that up, that I've been in those same situations. I remember early in my career, a story I will never forget. And my wife and I were at it was a family summer event, extended family. So it was cousins of cousins and friends of cousins. And there was a lady there that I had to fire. And frankly, she was fairly angry when it happened, which was fine. She had been in a pretty bad state, I think mentally, up until that point, just not happy at work at all. And she came over to me and told me how happy she was that she was let go because she had found a career in real estate. And she loved doing it. She loved everything about the job. She was successful. And I never forgot that. And I'm like, I think that everyone is able to go do something well. And sometimes they just are in a role that they're not going to do well. And, as a manager or leader, it's our job to speak real truth to them, the truth in grace, though, and truth in love. So you said earlier, quote from scripture while you were talking, I was able to look it up about what Jesus said about not lording it over them. And this is in Matthew 20. I'll read 24 and 26. It says, and when the 10 heard it, they were indignant at the two brothers. But Jesus called them to him and said, you know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. It shall not be so among you, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. So clearly he was rebuking a couple of his disciples who were focused on who was going to be number one and who was going to be number two in that. So change of topic again, Jim. What are your spiritual disciplines? What do you do on a daily, weekly basis to keep your relationship with the Lord strong and to grow in sanctification?
So I'm very diverse. So I have a drive to work most days. Pretty much my whole career, I've had a drive to work, except for there was a few years I didn't. I was just a couple minutes away. But so the phone's my biggest. I know everybody says phones are bad, but they're also extremely helpful. I can look up like a topic. It can be, what's the Bible say about patience? If I'm struggling with patience, or if I'm struggling with maybe a boss or maybe a boss's boss, and it'll give me, maybe I'm between conference calls, it'll give me a 5-minute little video or a YouTube video, kind of like a TED Talk, spiritual TED Talk, I guess. So I'm very open to I will find them all over, and it just takes me 30 seconds to find something that rejuvenates me. I'll pop in a podcast on the way to work, listen to 15 minutes of it, praise and worship. Love to rock out when I'm on lunch or driving home from work. It gets me in a different mindset because I try to turn everything off once I leave. So I use every aspect, try to read a little bit. I'm not the biggest reader because I read so much at work, One of the best books that I like is Tony Dungy, Uncommon. I don't know if you've read that.
I have not. I know who Tony Dungy is. I've read some of his other stuff, but not that one.
Little daily devotional books in my office. And what's cool is when a few times I'll go in there over the years and I'll see somebody else looking at it. They just pick it up. They'll be waiting for me or something and it's laying there on the desk. They'll pick it up and look at it. So that finds a way to seep into others too.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. As you look back earlier in your career as a young leader, what were some of the issues you struggled with early on? Do you still struggle with them? Or if you do, how do you manage them? Or if not, how did you overcome them?
So early on, I struggled with, I guess, controlling my temper. The first few years was just a ton of pressure for performance. And, one of the ways to do that is top down and run it like the military. It works, but it doesn't work. So I carried it with me all the time. I was working for a gentleman. He's a good friend of mine now. I love him to death. But at the time, we were kind of butting heads a little. And I had to tell him one day because we were both being bad cop. And I said, sir, this isn't working. I said, we got a lot of faces looking down. I said, we can't both be bad cop. I said, you can be bad cop or I can be bad cop. I said, but respectfully, we can't both be bad cop. I said, I don't mind being good cop. I would rather. And then he just looked at me. He paused like 5 seconds. It felt like an eternity to me because I hardly really ever spoke up to him. And he said, okay, bro, we'll do it your way. You be bad cop. I'll be good cop. But what ended up happening is he ended up being the good cop and I slowly turned into good cop and we were good cop all the time. And the store just like that year, the store went store of the year. The store did one store of the year. And then the next year I got promoted, moved on and took that same philosophy. And then a couple of years later, I was store manager of the year and then kept that philosophy again and was store manager of the year. And it just works. People get behind you. They want to work for a leader that loves on them and talks to them and knows about their kids. And I've never been afraid to say, I'm going to pray for you. People are struggling with stuff and and then I've had people come to me and say, Jim, will you pray for me? And of course, so that's when I know that they know that I care about them. Because anybody will come up, shoot the bull with them. But when they're close enough to come up and tell you they're going through stuff and they're asking you to pray for them, at least I know something's working in them. I'm feeling good that God has opened that door for me. I've never crossed any line. I've never forced anything on anybody.
The story you told about you guys both becoming good cop and things went really well for you was a surprise to you and a lot to learn as a leader that when you treat people well, when you care about them, when you really care about them, good things happen. I mean, it's the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do biblically. It's the right thing to do just as a leader. But yeah, good things happen. So that's an interesting story. Hey, when you look around, Jim, at the world today, whether it be in politics, business, whatever, what do you think is the biggest gap in leadership in general?
I think tolerance is the biggest gap right now. I think a lot of people talk about being tolerant of other people, but they're really not. That's the biggest gap, I think, is if we really just practice what we preached about being tolerant, I think everybody in all positions, even in our own Christian bubble, Jason, I mean, we talk tolerance, but you don't see it sometimes. It's like coming out of people's mouths, but then you don't see it from as many people as you'd like to see it come from. And it's the same thing with political world. Some people do, they talk tolerance, but then you don't see it, as much as you'd like to see it. So it's kind of like, when you're building a team, you do all kinds of stuff. And I do the same thing. I build a team with, give me the misfit toys. That's what I want. I want to build a team with the misfit toys because they're the ones that are just going to be full of ideas and they're not afraid to say anything. And I'll watch them go, as an example, let's say they're just driving down the road. They're not, but let's say they're doing something. And I'll just use an example. Like as long as they're driving down the road, Jason, they might go over the stripe a little bit and then come back in. They might even hit the rumble strip once in a while. But the instant I stand there and say, hey, don't do it that way. I mean, I've just defeated what I'm trying to build. Now this team that I built that you might have thought were misfit toys when I started building the team, they're leading everybody because they're thinking on their own. They're not afraid to stick their hand up. They're not afraid to try things because I'm supporting them. My boss trusts me to build a team that's going to support me. So my boss comes alongside and supports them also. I just think that giving people the benefit of the doubt, being more tolerant of differences will go a long way. I wish it would change a little bit more.
Well, certainly we've seen, especially in the most recent past, I think, a lot more divisiveness in our nation and unfortunately in the church. If you look past the last 3 years, and many times people are hypersensitive about things that just don't matter. I mean, there's a time when we have to draw a hard line on things, but there are far too many times that we're drawing hard lines on things that don't matter. There are opinions that we don't show people grace, and drives a lot of division, whether that's on a team at a retail store or in a church or in a family, just a lack of grace, right? At the end of the day, that's what it is. It's a lack of grace that we show one another.
I've seen things come up at church and it's tough, because being a leader, you kind of try to give everybody grace on everything when you're a leader in a business. And then I see stuff at church, which just heartens me about the church. So I try to be the opposite of it and give everybody grace.
Yeah, the idea is, in church discipline, the whole idea is reconciliation when we do have to go down that path. And it all starts with one person, one believer going to one other believer and talking to them, not gossiping and not going to other people about it, but one person to one person. And then if that doesn't work, they bring one other person and, talk to that person, with the whole goal being reconciliation, not kick them out, not to come down on them too harshly. And it's a difficult balance. I'm blessed right now in that the church we've been a part of for 6 or 7 years, I think, does it really well when it needs to be done, and never perfect because we're all humans. And when it's done well, it's a beautiful thing because it's a scriptural model and we follow it, it works. So Jim, I think I'm going to ask you a question we've talked, I think, about quite a bit, and maybe there's some other things you want to point out, but how do you honor Christ in your work? You go in, you're managing a retail store, you got a job to do there, and about profitability and turnover and all those metrics that you have to deal with. But as you're doing that, how do you honor Christ?
Well, fortunately, like I said, I work for a great company. The leadership is awesome. I've had some great bosses and they've made sure that I've always felt comfortable. I've just been fortunate. I guess maybe I just feel more confident because I know that I've grown up in an environment where it's okay to talk about my faith. I'm not preaching to associates in the store. If they see a picture in my office or they see a book on my shelf in my office or something like that, they ask a question, then it's game on at that point. I'll talk to them about anything they want to talk about. Obviously, when you're financially responsible to turn a profit and still be a Christian, we don't do anything that I've ever thought stops me from being a Christian. Fortunately, I work for a great company and everything's always above board. Think I've ever had to change anything or do anything different. Now, if I work for a different company, maybe I'd have to. I haven't had to face that kind of adversity like some people have with their employers. Like I said, I don't come in here with a Bible in my head and hit people over the head. I do walk through the store early mornings, late nights when there's nobody in their department, and maybe it's just a simple, I'll put my hand on their workstation and I'm just standing there and nobody knows what I'm doing. But sometimes I'm just saying a 5-second prayer, a blessing over the people in the department that, whatever they're going through, Lord helps them with that, or if they're going through a dark spot. And then I'll move. Nobody knows what I'm doing, but that's the kind of stuff that the 2 hours a month that I do that, nobody cares because I'm doing my job. So when I was talking about misfit toys, I meant that in a nice way. Like I've took over stores where I was told the management team that was there wasn't the best, or they had all kinds of issues, or, all these bad things were put down on them. And then after a couple months of just giving them direction and letting them know that I'm there to work alongside them, I want them to make decisions, but make smart decisions. Because I think when people make mistakes, that's when the good stuff happens. As long as it's not something detrimental where it's, we're not building rocket ships here.
Right.
So I like people to make their own mistakes. I don't want them to go do a job that they're completely lost at. I ask enough questions to see if they have the skill set to do what needs accomplished. And then if I see a gap, then I might ask some more questions and fill it in for them. But I think the more responsibility you give people that's, within their means, the more buy-in you get from them and the prouder they are of the work when it gets done. Because if they do something you tell them to do step by step, yeah, they're obviously proud of it because you tell them good job. But if they do something and they do it the way they see it done and they hit it in your vision, and then when they step back and do it, they're like, I nailed it. That's what I meant when I said that. Took over teams where they were writing off the team, like I said, like they were misfit toys. And then I look back now and they're store managers, they're district staff. They're doing all kinds of stuff throughout the company. And they were 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago, they were writing them off. They were going to be done. I was going in there to fire them, which hardly ever happens when I would take over a store. I'd say 90% of the people step up and do what needs to be done. They just need to be managed a different way. That was all. Yep.
I recently talked with somebody I work with. He's been where I'm at for years, and I've not been there a really long time. He's a younger guy. And he was telling me how surprised he is at how big of an impact leadership can make in people's lives and the engagement on the shop floor. And it was encouraging to me because, when I first got there, he was disengaged and frustrated. But what I saw in that individual is exactly what you're talking about. is that he, hadn't been led well. He hadn't been given a chance to use some of his knowledge. He had a lot of ideas, really good ones, to implement and make things better, and then just be listened to and not be talked down to. The way he described it is he said, it was to be treated like you're an object, not a human. And so the longer that I've worked as a manager or in, professional settings, part of me becomes more and more surprised at the level of leadership and competence there is in some organizations at very high levels. But then the part of me now is just, I'm not surprised anymore. It's disheartening. It's sometimes shocking because of the impact that it has on an organization. And we're not talking about capital investment and, we're not talking about big dollar costs. We're just talking about ensuring that leaders treat people well, treat them like humans, as you said, to, treat them like family, treat them with love, real true, like biblical love, right? Like truth and grace. Yeah, give them clear expectations, hold them accountable. I like what you said a little while ago about when the mistakes happen. Those are good times to build trust, because then they're going to look and say, okay, am I going to get, ground down into a pile of dust, or is there going to be some grace here, and, am I going to feel supported? So makes a huge impact. It's intangible, and some people think it's maybe a little bit magic, but it's really not. It's basic good leadership principles. So
it's funny, like, so, you'll take over a team or you'll develop a team, and then they're like, hey, we got an opportunity for Billy Bob or Sally, and you're like, oh, because they're really like family at that point, and you're like,
yeah,
maybe you know the other leader, you know what they're getting into, and you're like, you don't want to let them go, not to hold them back, but you're just like, everybody has to learn to deal with adversity of having different kind of bosses and different kind of leaders. But that's been some of the toughest things when I've had to let people go, not let them go, term them. I mean, let them go somewhere else, and you're like, I hope that they can adapt to, his leadership style or her leadership style, and, and still be the rock star that they are. And that's some of the growing pains that I do face, and I have heartburn about, because you'll see somebody that is just phenomenal and was looked upon as just being a great superstar, and then they'll go somewhere else and it's just a completely different leader altogether that's like an autocrat, and that they just don't work under them. And next thing you know, a year down the road, they're going down a path where they're disengaged and they're looking at leaving the company. And I've seen that happen before too.
Yeah.
Which kind of breaks my heart to a certain extent. And then sometimes I'll do my best to bring that person back, and it's not to protect them. It's just, I know that they've got great stuff in them. They just only work well under one style of leadership.
Yeah. Well, again, something else I've become convinced of more and more with time is, for me, the number one factor for me going into a role is who I'm working for. I've worked for enough really, really poor leaders, and I've worked for enough great leaders. It's just such an enormous difference. I like to think I'm always going to have a strong work ethic, and I think I do, no matter what. But boy, it's a lot harder when you're doing it for somebody who, treats you poorly, doesn't support you, doesn't respect you, versus somebody who does all those things. And it's just, it's easy, it's easy to get up and try to do more and do better. And it's natural. It's like it just flows.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Jim, who do you follow as far as leadership authors? Is there some books? You said you weren't a big reader, but I heard you mention podcasts. So what are some sources from a leadership perspective that you'd recommend?
So Dungy, Maxwell. I remember the one thing, Dungy, that always sticks out, and I use this all the time, is when he talks about when he was a coach, being a Christ follower as a coach, trying to do that same kind of leadership. But it's tough when you're a high-performing coach, over a team like that. So what he did is he would do playbacks of the games, and he didn't talk about the stuff that went wrong, and he didn't review the plays that were awful. He always reviewed the plays that were awesome. And because what he was always trying to do, and so I try to do that in all my staff meetings, all my reviews I do with people, all my quarterly reviews, I talk about the good stuff. Now, obviously, if there's an ethical issue or there's just something that's way out there in left field, that's just a super bad performance issue, you got to talk about it. But the bulk of my conversations are always about the good stuff, what they're doing good. Let's repeat that. Tell me about it, and things like that. So like I said, Maxwell's just, everybody reads Maxwell, but
is there a favorite? Do you have a favorite one of his books, or Tony Dungy? You mentioned one of his books, but specific
I would
favorites?
say Uncommon. I've read a few of his, but I would say Uncommon's the best.
Okay,
and they're all
good.
Similarly themed, but yeah.
I'll put a link to that in the show notes so people can check it out. And then John Maxwell is one of my favorite leadership authors. I started reading him many, many years ago. 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership is a classic.
Yeah, lots and lots of books.
Yeah. real practical. I mean, easy read, stuff you can put to work immediately from John Maxwell. So good. Hey, if you think about, let's say, I'll give you an example, and maybe this has happened to you. Let's say you have one of your managers that gets a chance to be a store manager, going to get promoted, go to a different store. What are some tips that you would give that person as a first-time, leader at that level that maybe, you looking back on your own journey, you wish someone would have told you? But what are some tips you have for someone just starting down that path?
This comes up a lot. As long as I've worked, there's been a lot of assistants that are now store managers. And, if I don't know that they're getting promoted to begin with, like on one of the first phone calls, it seems like that week they're working. And a lot of it's because they want to hear proud papa tell them good job, which makes me proud being able to tell them that. But
sure.
Some of the things I talk about is controllables. There's management controllable issues in every business. When you're in a business that's built on performance, there's always outliers. And I don't know, and not to go into outliers philosophy too much, but there's always outliers in any kind of financial business, or even in your business, there's outliers. Maybe it's production runs. You always seems like you got supervisors that are outliers on this metric or that metric. And so the stuff that's controllable, I always tell them that's the number one thing. But there's just stuff that they can control. They can control the cleanliness of their building. They can control the customer service in their building. They can control close rates on estimates. There's so much stuff that they can control simply by following up and holding people accountable in the right way. And so that's always the stuff that I talk to them about. I'm like, you can't control macroeconomics and you can't control what's going on with things like that, but you can control that kind of stuff. And that's what's going to set you apart from the other stores in your district and in your region and your division, is looking at things from 30,000 up in the air, which is a lot of times in a corporate level, all they can look at is 30,000 feet up in the air. They'll get 20, 25 different metrics that they're looking at. And you might be an outlier on, 10 of them, but all your other stores in the district are 15, 16. Theoretically, you're doing a better job of controlling the things that you can control.
Yeah.
And so that's always one of the biggest tips I give them. Control the things they control and take care of their people. I said, just like when we work together, our people come first. Spoil them, give them the extra days off, talk to them when they're going through stuff. Everybody does a pizza party. Yeah. What I found over the years is people don't care about pizza parties. They care about relationships, and they care about having the boss's phone number and having you send them a card. Jason, I can turn my thing on so you can see it. In front of me right now, I've wrote like 25 personal cards that are getting mailed out to employees today. It's just stuff like that sets stuff apart.
Yeah. I like that. Control what you can control. It reminds me of Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, another really great book. And that's, one section that he talks about, focusing on the area you can control and not getting wrapped up and spending emotional energy on those things you can't, because it's just a distraction. And I think, that people can fail sometimes because of that, and they ignore what they can control. And it's their sphere of influence, I think is how Stephen Covey put it. So that's really good advice. It's the first time I've heard someone on the podcast talk about that specifically, but it is really good, especially for a first-time leader. Don't get distracted by the things you can't control, and focus on what you can control and take care of your people. The people do love pizza, but I think they appreciate being treated fairly and be treated with kindness more. It's more important than pizza, which for sure.
Yeah.
Hey, Jim, one last question before we wrap up here. When you retire, which you've got a ways to go, you and I are similar in age, so maybe it's time of life we're starting to think about that a little bit, but we're not quite ready. But when you do, what do you hope will be the impact you've had on people that you worked with over the years? Just
that I gave them an opportunity and I trusted them. And, that's a tough question. I'm a pretty humble guy, but if I hired you tomorrow and you became the vice president, I would be happy for you. I wouldn't have any regrets. I would just be super proud of you. I just hope that I'm leaving behind that I know that I was trying to build wealth for people by getting them promoted and helping them get stable careers. And they were able to retire wealthy, and, that it was about them. It wasn't necessarily about me. Obviously it's about me and my family. That's why I work. But while I'm here working, I try to make it about everybody else so that they can be successful.
That reminds me of something I told a young engineer that I brought on a team I had several years ago. He was just one of those, I'll call him an outlier from just aptitude. just even his ability to work with others, you could just tell that probably, before his career's done, he's going to be running a big company. And I told him that. We parted ways at some point, not under bad terms. I left and went to another organization. Then he left and went to another organization. We've stayed in touch. Actually, my wife and I and him and his wife got together for dinner last fall. But I told him, I said, there could be a time when you call me up and want me to come and be an ops guy for you and you'll be running some big company. I said, and that's okay. Like you said, I'd be proud to have had a small part in your career growth and helped you out and, gave you maybe an early shot in your career, but knowing you're going to go a long, long way. So, well, I'll put your LinkedIn profile in the show notes so people can click on that and reach out to you there. So it'd be easy to do. Okay. Well, hey, man. I appreciate your time. I know you're busy with work and other things that you do. Learned a lot. I've enjoyed serving with you. You and I have served on a board together, and really appreciate your style and your love for the Lord. It's been good. Appreciate the time today.
All right. Thanks, Jason.
All right. Thanks, man.
And thank each of you for joining us once again this month to listen in and learn from a fellow Christ follower and leader. I pray that today's interview inspired you to lead with love and focus on what you can control, all for the glory of God. Lord willing, we will see you again right here next month.